The sky over Seattle shimmered with that golden purple tint it gets right before twilight, just as the string lights above the rooftop patio flickered to life. I sat at the head of the table at Aurelio, my favorite restaurant overlooking Elliott Bay. The space was warm with the quiet clink of cutlery, low jazz murmuring under conversation, and the occasional burst of laughter from other tables. My sapphire gown, Julian's favorite, fitted me like second skin, elegant, understated. The waiter had just poured the last round of sparkling rosé when my sister cleared her throat and tapped her dessert fork against her glass. The sound echoed too sharp, too deliberate. Sabine always had a flair for drama. She wore red scarlet, actually tight and slick like lacquer, her golden hair swept to one side in beachy defiance. She stood slowly, smiling, wide one manicured hand, resting theatrically on her stomach. "I have something to share." She began, eyes glinting with practiced joy. I wasn't going to say anything just yet, but tonight feels right. A flicker of discomfort tightened Julian's jaw beside me. I didn't look at him. I looked at her. "I'm pregnant," Sabine said. The table stilled. My mother's mouth fell open before her hands flew up to clap. My father nodded slowly, brows lifted in surprise. A chorus of polite shock began to form until Sabine raised her hand. "And there's more," she said. "Julian is the father." I heard it more than felt it. The scrape of silverware against ceramic, a sharp inhale from my aunt, a wine glass clinking against another in someone's trembling hand, and the one sound that didn't come, Julian's voice. He sat frozen beside me, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed on the tablecloth. He didn't deny it. Not a word. I felt the collective weight of every eye at the table shift toward me, heavy with anticipation, pity, maybe even morbid curiosity. I could practically hear Sabine's inner voice daring me to unravel, to crumble under the weight of her perfectly executed performance. Instead, I lifted my glass. "That's a bold claim," I said, my voice smooth even. I turned slightly to face her, letting the soft chime of my bracelet fill the silence. "Let's see if it holds." And I took a sip. Sabine had always been the kind of child adults adored, on instinct, wide-eyed, sunlit, uncontainably loud. I, on the other hand, was described as composed by kindergarten, praised for coloring inside the lines, and never raising my voice. When she was born, my mother placed her in my arms and whispered, "Your baby sister," like she was entrusting me with a delicate, sparkling jewel. From that moment forward, I became the quiet backdrop to her spotlight. Growing up, she took things. Small at first. My stuffed rabbit Eloise disappeared from my bed and reappeared on hers, renamed and declared hers from the start. Then it was my best friend from 5th grade who suddenly only wanted to have sleepovers at Sabine's. By high school, it was my clothes, my diary, even my passwords. I was told to be patient to understand. "She looks up to you," my father once said, as though admiration excused erasure. She never wanted her own. She wanted mine. When I got into Columbia, Sabine bragged to her friends that our family is Ivy League now. A year later, she faked an interest in journalism just long enough to follow me to New York. I once walked into a bar near campus to find her laughing with a guy I'd been seeing, arms brushing, eyes locked. I left without saying a word, but Julian had been different. He hadn't come from my world. I met him at a gallery fundraiser during my second year back in Seattle. He was steady, thoughtful, someone who noticed the things I didn't say. When he held my hand, I felt real, safe. And for once, I believed Sabine wouldn't interfere. She was in Los Angeles by then, chasing commercials and luxury skincare sponsors, living a life built on filters and flattery. So I let myself believe he was mine in a way nothing else ever had been. Tonight, watching her cradle her stomach and claim Julian as if he were some expensive handbag she'd impulsively grabbed off my shelf, I realized she hadn't changed. She'd just grown bolder, and I had grown quieter, but never blind. They launched into it like they'd rehearsed it in the mirror, each line, designed to sound spontaneous, human forgivable. It just happened, Sabine said with a breathy softness, as though falling into bed with my husband was a force of gravity and not a choice made 1,000 times. Julian added, "We didn't mean to fall in love," his voice, low eyes fixed on a crack in the wood grain of the table. He wouldn't look at me. Sabine rubbed her stomach with delicate, almost reverent fingers. "We were both broken," she said. "I guess we found comfort in each other. It wasn't planned, but maybe it was meant." The word meant hung in the air like perfume, sweet and sickening. I studied them both, watching my mother dab at her eyes with a napkin and my father shift in his seat, clearly unsure whether to be outraged or relieved that someone in the family was finally giving them a grandchild. No one asked how long it had been going on. No one asked what they thought this would do to me. The silence around the table was thick with unspoken questions, but no one filled it except me. "Excuse me," I said, rising with slow deliberation. "Just need a moment." I stepped away from the table, past the confused waiter, lingering with our check and into the long hallway that led to the restrooms. Not once did I feel tears press behind my eyes. Not once did my breath catch in my throat. Instead, there was clarity. I didn't go into the restroom to cry. I didn't need to. I stood in front of the mirror and reapplied my lipstick, smoothing the color into place with a tissue. Then I opened my clutch, removed the small embossed envelope I'd carried there for weeks, and traced my fingers along its seam. They thought this was their stage, that I was the audience. But they had no idea they'd wandered into a play I'd already written. It started with a scent perfume, unfamiliar and sweet, clinging to Julian's collar after a late client meeting. Then came the way his phone never left his hand, the abrupt silences when I walked into the room, the cold half-smile he gave me when I asked how his day had been. He didn't lie well, not in words, but in behavior, he was fluent. At first, I tried to believe the lies were mine, that I was paranoid, that Sabine's name appearing in casual conversation more often was coincidence, that her sudden return to Seattle after years in LA wasn't a red flag waving itself in my face. But truth has a scent, too, and I've learned to follow it. 3 months ago, I retained a private investigator. His name was Randall Finn. Quiet man, excellent reputation, referred to me by a former author we published, whose ex-husband had hidden assets in Prague. I didn't give Randall much. Just Julian's schedule and a few vague suspicions. What he gave me in return was damning. Photos of Julian and Sabine entering the back entrance of the St. Clair Hotel, 17 dates, detailed logs of overlapping phone records, screen captures of text messages I hadn't been able to access because Julian had changed his passcode after 12 years of marriage. But that wasn't the worst part. One evening, after Randall dropped off the manila envelope of evidence, I sat on our living room couch, stunned by the sheer banality of their messages. They weren't clever or poetic. They were just selfish. And then I remembered something. A conversation Julian and I had 2 years earlier. About family, about the kind of life we wanted, about the vasectomy. He didn't want children. He'd made that clear. I respected it. What I didn't expect was that I'd need the medical paperwork one day to defend myself from a lie. But I had it, filed neatly in our shared safe under medical. I made a copy and tucked it in a red envelope, the same one I carried with me to my birthday dinner tonight. And now it was time to use it. I returned to the table with unhurried steps, smoothing my dress as I sat. Sabine was mid-laugh, swirling her wine, still glowing under the manufactured spotlight of her own drama. Julian sat straighter now, as if playing the role of supportive father-to-be, nodding solemnly, while my mother asked about nursery themes and due dates. It was surreal, like watching a play you'd seen rehearsed 1,000 times, except the actors didn't know you'd already read the script. I waited. Waited until the chocolate mousse had arrived, until my father raised a glass in a half-hearted toast to new beginnings, until Sabine reached across the table to rest her hand on Julian's wrist like some benevolent goddess bestowing mercy. Then I set my fork down and cleared my throat. Just so we're clear, I said, my voice steady but resonant enough to silence every fork mid-air I've known about the affair for months. Julian flinched. Sabine's mouth fell open, but no sound came out. I reached into my clutch and retrieved the crimson envelope. No rush, no shaking hands, just precision. I placed it between their water glasses and leaned back. 17 hotel visits, I said softly. I figured once was a mistake, twice maybe desperation. But 17, I shrugged. That's just math. Sabine's hand twitched toward the envelope, but I lifted a finger. There's more, I said. Audio recordings, text threads, surveillance footage. I've had time. Julian finally spoke. Liz, this isn't the place. Neither was my birthday, I cut in. But here we are. I looked to Sabine. Congratulations on the pregnancy, by the way. She straightened, regaining some of that smug composure. It's real, Lysandra. And it's happening. You can't stop love. Oh, I wouldn't dream of it, I said. But you might want to flip to the last page. She did. Her eyes scanned the document and then froze. Julian leaned in. Frowning, then went pale. I believe you're familiar with that doctor's signature, I said. Julian had a vasectomy 5 years ago, which means I didn't need to finish. The blood drained from her face so fast it was almost clinical. Sabine blinked at the page as if it were written in a language she couldn't quite translate. Her lips parted, then closed again, then parted once more. This isn't real, she whispered. It's fake. You faked it. Julian didn't say a word. He took the paper from her hand and stared at the signature. His shoulders slumped. She's telling the truth, he said. Voice barely audible. I didn't think it would come up. We were careful. It wasn't supposed to matter. Sabine turned to him, panic rising. You told me I told you we were being cautious. I never told you I could get you pregnant. Her face collapsed under the weight of his confession. Whatever storyline she'd been writing in her head, whatever fantasy she'd hoped would unfold here tonight, was unraveling in real time. I watched her struggle to collect herself. Her hands trembled as she reached for her wine glass, but missed it by an inch. My mother made a noise, half gasp, half whimper, but no one moved. It was as if the entire table had turned to stone. I didn't want to do this tonight, I said calmly, but you made that choice for me. Sabine shook her head. You're just trying to ruin this moment. I tilted my head. You mean the moment you announced a child conceived in betrayal at your sister's birthday dinner, I waited a beat, then delivered it. I ran a DNA test. Sabine froze. You what I had access to a sample. You left your prenatal vitamins at Mom's house last week. I contacted your OB's lab. It wasn't hard. Turns out Julian isn't the father. But you already suspected that, didn't you? She stared at me, lips twitching, shaking her head again. The actual father, I continued, is Rupert Kingsley. The silence that followed was total. Even the background hum of the restaurant seemed to vanish. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's expression collapsed into something between horror and disbelief. Julian leaned back, staring at Sabine as though he'd just discovered fire and realized it burns. I finished my cake. The molten chocolate had long cooled, and the sweetness no longer registered on my tongue, but I ate it anyway, slowly, purposefully, while my sister's sobs faded down the corridor behind her. Julian went after her, of course. That's who he was now, the man who followed wreckage, not the one who prevented it. I signaled for the check. The waiter approached cautiously, as if afraid the table itself might explode. I handed him my card without flinching. My parents remained frozen. My mother's hands trembled in her lap, and my father's jaw twitched as though fighting the urge to speak and say absolutely nothing useful. I turned to them, placing my napkin gently beside my plate. "You can choose which daughter you support," I said evenly. "I already chose myself." Neither of them answered. The air around us pulsed with something raw and fragile. I smoothed my dress once more and walked out without looking back. Later that night, the house felt too quiet, too artificial in its silence. The lights were too soft, the framed photos too carefully placed, each one another reminder of what had once felt like love, now reduced to set dressing. I walked through the living room with a tote bag already packed earlier that week, just in case. Funny how, even then, before I had confirmation, I still knew. Deep down, I knew. I slipped off my wedding ring and placed it on the glass tray in the foyer beside Julian's favorite watch. A folded card rested beneath it. Just one sentence written in my neat, precise hand: "Patricia Donovan will be in touch." Then I pulled the front door closed behind me. I didn't cry on the elevator down. I didn't cry when I got into the cab, or when I handed the driver the address to the temporary apartment I'd rented 2 days ago under my maiden name. The tears would come later, maybe. But not tonight. Tonight belonged to the woman who didn't break, the one who had seen enough and walked away. The divorce was final 3 weeks after the dinner. Patricia moved swiftly, slicing through every delay Julian's lawyer attempted, with the precision of someone who'd handled far messier men. The prenup was airtight, my financial accounts, my business holdings, my retirement portfolio, all protected. Julian tried to drag out the process with emotional pleas. Late-night emails, voicemails at dawn. One even ended with, "You're still my wife, Liz. That has to mean something." It didn't. He meant something once, but not now. I blocked his number and let Patricia handle the rest. Closure in this case came with legal documentation and a courier envelope. Meanwhile, Sabine's world cracked. The tabloids didn't take long to catch the scent of scandal. Rupert Kingsley was a known name, our former stepfather and occasional political donor. When the DNA results leaked, Rupert publicly denied everything called Sabine delusional and hinted at blackmail. But the paternity test didn't lie. The child was his. Her followers turned quickly. Brand deals vanished. Comments were shut off. A headline read, "From influencer to infamy, the Sabine Linley, fallout." And I signed the lease on a condo in Belltown with floor-to-ceiling windows and no memories in the walls. I furnished it piece by piece deliberately. Nothing from the old house came with me. The color palette was clean, the bookshelves empty, waiting. I worked longer hours quietly growing the publishing house I'd built from nothing. My team didn't ask questions, they respected the shift in me. Sharper, steadier. Like something had been severed, and in its place steel had formed. At night, I lit a candle by the window and let the silence remind me of what I'd reclaimed, not just peace, but ownership of my life. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived. Handwritten, the envelope, soft and smudged. Sabine's name on the return address. Inside, 5 pages dense with uneven cursive. A rambling apology, a confession, a plea, and at the end, I miss my sister. Leo was born in early spring. I found out from our mother, who called and left a hesitant voicemail. 7 pounds, dark hair, healthy. They're naming him Leo. No emotion, just facts like a weather report, as if saying anything more might shatter whatever truce had settled over the ashes. The letter arrived a few weeks later. Sabine's handwriting hadn't changed, slanted dramatic loops, like someone trying too hard to be effortless. But the tone was different, measured, unsteady in a way I hadn't seen from her before. She wrote about therapy, about Rupert cutting contact, about the way people who once adored her had vanished overnight. "I don't expect anything from you," she wrote, "but I needed you to know I'm trying. I'm trying to be better for Leo, if not for me." I didn't respond right away. I let the letter sit on my nightstand beside a book I wasn't reading. I reread it twice before I finally folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. I didn't know what forgiveness looked like yet, but I knew what resentment felt like, and I was tired of carrying it. Then came the second letter. shorter, less formal, a single question. "Would you consider being Leo's godmother?" I said yes. The visit was quiet. No fanfare, no theatrics, just me standing in the doorway of Sabine's new apartment, a modest 2-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood that didn't try to impress anyone. She looked smaller, somehow, softer. She held Leo in her arms, his head nestled beneath her chin, his tiny fists curled into her sweater. She didn't say much, just handed him to me. He was warm, heavier than I expected, and when his eyes fluttered open, I saw none of the drama. None of the damage. Just a boy. "My son," she whispered, "deserves more than what I was raised to repeat." I nodded, my voice low. "He's innocent. Maybe this is a new beginning." And for the first time in a long while, she didn't reach for the spotlight. She simply let that truth settle between us. 1 year later, I turned 44. There was no rooftop, no panoramic views, no tension stretched thin across white linen, just a long table in the corner of a cozy bistro with soft lighting, real laughter, and people who showed up because they wanted to, not because they were obligated to play a role. I wore a dress that didn't remind me of anyone. No curated elegance, no symbolism, just soft fabric, clean lines, and comfort. Around me were colleagues who had become friends' friends who had become anchors. Megan, who let me crash on her couch that first night. Jules, who made me laugh until my ribs ached. And David seated beside me, hand resting lightly over mine, never gripping, never pulling, just present. No one asked about Sabine or Julian. They didn't need to. Everyone at that table knew where I'd been, but more importantly, they saw where I was now. The waiter brought out a small cake, vanilla with lemon curd and fresh raspberries. There were no candles, just a silver dessert knife and a quiet hush as I stood to speak. "I've had louder birthdays," I said, and the table chuckled. Certainly messier ones. But this is what I hoped for even when I didn't know how to name it. I raised my glass. "To peace," I said, looking around at the faces that held no secrets, no betrayals, and to protecting it with everything we've got. Glasses clinked. Someone let out a quiet amen. David smiled at me, not with pity, not with admiration, just understanding. And I smiled back for real this time, not for appearances, not out of obligation, but because this version of me, the one who had walked through fire and left what didn't serve her behind, was finally home. No performance, no defense, no more roles to play. Just a woman who had once been broken and chose to rebuild, piece by piece, on her terms.